The snow had begun before dawn, drifting in soft spirals across the wide open plains as if the sky itself wished to wrap the world in silence. Elias Hart stood on his porch, lantern in hand, watching the faint gold light tremble in the winter air. Christmas morning should have carried warmth, hymns, laughter, the echo of his late wife's humming, but the ranch felt hollow, a long breath held since the day she died. He tightened his coat and listened to the wind sweep over the land like an old memory returning to knock on his ribs. Behind him, small footsteps padded across the wooden floor. Hazel, just 6, sleepy-eyed and wrapped in a blanket like a tiny ghost, tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, is Mama watching Christmas from the clouds?" she whispered, her voice a fragile thread between belief and sorrow. Elias brushed her hair gently, letting his thumb rest against her temple for a moment longer than usual. "I reckon she is, sweetheart," he murmured, though the words cracked faintly. Hazel nodded as if she'd been expecting that answer, then drifted back inside, trusting the day to unfold as it must. Elias lingered another heartbeat, then turned toward the barn to feed the horses. It was a simple ritual, but rituals were what kept a man stitched together when the world tugged him apart. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he crossed the yard. The barn stood dark and quiet, its roof powdered in white, its door rattling in the wind like something inside was breathing. Elias frowned. He didn't remember leaving it unlatched. A gust pushed it open with a long, uneasy groan. He lifted the lantern. Its glow spilled across the hay-dusty floor, stretching shadows along the beams. The scent of old wood, winter air, and horse musk drifted steady and familiar, until a faint sound, soft as a mouse's whimper, slipped from the far stall. Elias froze. The horses were quiet. They didn't fuss unless startled. He stepped closer, boots whispering against the straw. The lantern revealed a shape curled beside the feed barrel, a human shape. Slender. Still. As if the cold itself had sculpted her from the shadows. A woman. Elias inhaled sharply, the breath burning his lungs. She was lying on her side, head tucked beneath her arm, dark hair tangled with frost, her dress torn at the sleeves. Snowflakes clung to her lashes like tiny white stars. She looked barely alive, cheeks hollow, lips blued by the cold. For a moment he thought she might already be gone. He knelt beside her carefully, setting the lantern down so its circle of light cradled them both. Fear flickered, not of her, but of what it meant to find a wounded stranger in his barn on Christmas morning, when the world already judged him a man cursed by bad luck. Still, he reached out, touching her wrist. Her skin was icy but not stiff. A faint pulse beat beneath his fingers, trembling like a bird trapped beneath a cage. "Ma'am," he whispered. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. A thin breath escaped her, fogging the air between them. Elias noticed then that something was pinned to the front of her dress. Paper, crumpled, soaked in melted snow. A note. He hesitated only a second before peeling it away gently. The ink had bled, but a few words, desperate and uneven, still clung to the page. "Please love her." The words struck Elias like a thrown stone. Love her? Who wrote such a thing? Who abandoned her here, freezing, broken, with nothing but a plea handwritten in fear? His throat tightened. Something inside him, a place he'd walled off since losing his wife, shifted with a slow, painful stir. The woman trembled weakly. Instinct overrode every doubt. Elias stripped off his coat, wrapping it around her shoulders. She flinched at the touch, but he kept his voice low, steady, the same voice he used when calming a spooked mare. "You're safe. I've got you now." Her eyes opened the slightest crack. They were dark, haunted, glimmering with a fear so deep he felt it echo in his own bones. She tried to speak, but only a rasp came out, more breath than sound. Elias shook his head gently. "Don't try. You're too cold." He scooped her into his arms. She weighed nearly nothing, a fragile thing built of bones and bruises and too many miles of sorrow. As he lifted her, her head fell against his shoulder, and he felt the faint, instinctive shiver of someone who had gone far too long without gentleness. The walk back to the cabin felt longer than usual. Snow pressed against his face, the wind tugging at the edges of his thoughts like old doubts returning. What would the town say if they saw him carrying an unknown woman into his home? How would Sheriff Briggs twist this into scandal? Elias knew that gossip in a small town was faster than any winter storm, and colder. But when he pushed open the cabin door and Hazel gasped softly, covering her mouth with both hands, he felt the choice settle into him with quiet certainty. He couldn't leave the woman to die. Not today. Not ever. Daddy, who is she? Hazel whispered, eyes wide with worry rather than fear. Elias laid the woman near the hearth, where the fire breathed out long ribbons of warmth. I don't know yet, he answered softly, brushing a strand of hair from the stranger's cheek. But she needs help. Hazel knelt beside her, small fingers hovering as if afraid to break her. She's cold, she murmured, as if naming the obvious might heal it. Elias nodded and added more logs to the fire, watching the flames brighten, casting amber shadows that flickered across the woman's bruised face. As warmth seeped into the room, the woman stirred again. Her hand twitched, clutching at her dress where the note had once been. Elias set the paper beside her gently, unable to shake the chilling simplicity of its message. Please love her. Hazel leaned close to Elias. Daddy, do you think someone hurt her? He swallowed. I think someone let her down, he said quietly. Snow piled against the windows as the storm thickened, the world outside disappearing into white silence. Inside the cabin, the fire cracked softly, filling the space with a fragile warmth that felt almost like healing. Then the woman's eyes opened wider, fear flashing sharp and sudden, and her lips parted with a hoarse gasp. They're coming, she whispered, and the lantern flame trembled as if it understood the weight of her words. By mid-morning the storm had settled into a steady white hush, the kind that softened every sound and made the world feel suspended between breaths. Inside the cabin, the fire glowed with a patient warmth, its crackling the only steady rhythm against the woman's ragged ones. Elias knelt beside her again, checking her pulse, noting how the trembling in her hands had eased now that heat reached her bones. Yet her whisper, "They're coming," kept echoing through him like a warning carved into the winter itself. Hazel sat cross-legged near the hearth, watching the woman with a seriousness far beyond her 6 years. She offered the stranger her own cup of warm milk, holding it out with 2 small hands. She needs it more than me, she insisted quietly, almost protectively, and Elias felt a strange ache bloom in his chest. Children always saw truth before grown folk complicated it. The woman tried to sit up, but pain rippled through her, and she winced sharply. Elias steadied her with a gentle hand on her shoulder. Easy, he murmured. You've been out in the cold too long. Her gaze flicked up to his, quick and wary, like a deer expecting the snap of a trap. He softened his voice even further. You're safe here. Safe. The word hovered unsteady between them, too tender for the life she clearly knew. Her lips parted, and a faint sound escaped, something between a breath and a plea, but no words formed. She touched her throat, frustrated. Elias understood. Either fear had stolen her voice, or someone else had tried to. He looked away so she wouldn't see the anger flaring beneath the surface. Needing supplies, he bundled himself in his coat, though the decision felt risky. Leaving her alone, even with Hazel, gnawed at him. Still, she needed medicine and warmer clothes. I'll be back soon, he told her, fastening his scarf. Hazel will stay with you. The woman's eyes widened, panic flickering as if he'd spoken abandonment. He paused, gentled his tone. Not leaving you. Just getting things you need. Her trembling eased, if only slightly. The walk into town was slow, the snow deepening with each step. Elias tried to ignore the uneasy churn in his stomach, but by the time he reached Main Street, the familiar buzz of gossip carried on the wind like a swarm of flies to honey. Folks leaned close, whispers sharp and cutting. That Hart fella brought home a woman this morning. Heard she's trouble. Man like him shouldn't be taking in strays. Bad for a little girl to see. Elias kept his jaw tight, eyes forward. He'd grown used to talk after his wife died, accusations that he couldn't manage a ranch or raise a child alone, but today the words wound deeper. This woman, whoever she was, didn't deserve their suspicion. Inside Nadine Crowell's seamstress shop, warmth washed over him, carrying the scent of wool, lace, and pine. Nadine herself looked up from her sewing machine, auburn hair pinned loosely, eyes sharp with curiosity. "Elias Hart," she said, drawing out the syllables like a needle threading into cloth. "You're out early. On Christmas, no less." Elias set his hands on the counter. "I need something warm for a woman. Small, thin, probably a size down from Hazel's old hand-me-downs. And blankets. Thick ones." Nadine arched a brow. "Woman? You took someone in." The question wasn't unkind, but it held weight. He nodded. "Is she hurt?" He hesitated, long enough for Nadine to read the truth in the silence. Her posture softened. She began gathering garments, a wool dress, a shawl, a pair of thick socks. As she wrapped them, her voice dipped low. "Be careful, Elias. Folks are watching. Sheriff Briggs especially." He knew that. Briggs had always had a knack for sticking his boots into matters that didn't call for him. "Thank you," Elias said simply, paying in coins that felt far too light for what he owed. When he stepped outside, he nearly collided with Sheriff Briggs himself. The man was tall, broad, and carried authority like a badge carved from stone. "Heard you've got company out at your place," Briggs said, eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. "She was freezing in my barn," Elias answered, forcing calm. "I wasn't about to let her die." Briggs stroked his mustache. "Sure. But until we know who she is, she stays under suspicion. Could be a runaway. Could be trouble. Could be innocent," Elias countered tightly. Briggs snorted. "Then why didn't she come to town for help? Folks with clean pasts don't hide in barns." Elias felt a flicker of anger but swallowed it. Getting into a fight with the sheriff helped no one, especially her. "If you've got questions, you can ask them later." She can barely stand. Briggs stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I'll be riding out to your place soon. Don't make me find something you ought to have told me." The threat hung heavy as winter fog. Elias didn't answer. He walked past the sheriff and headed home, the cold biting sharper now, as if the storm sensed the tension stirring between men and fate. When he returned, Hazel ran to him immediately. "Daddy." She woke up again. "I gave her my scarf." Her excitement dimmed slightly. She cried a little. Elias's breath caught. He set down the supplies and moved toward the hearth. The woman sat upright now, blanket around her shoulders, Hazel's tiny purple scarf looped around her neck. Her face shone with the faintest flush from the fire's warmth, but her eyes, those eyes, still carried storm clouds. He offered her the clothes Nadine had sent. She lifted the shawl with trembling fingers, brushing its softness as if she couldn't believe it belonged to her. A single tear slid down her cheek, striking the wool like a fallen crystal. "It's yours," Elias said softly. "You deserve warmth." Her lips parted again, and though no sound emerged, gratitude glimmered in her gaze like a candle fighting the wind. As she reached to take the dress, her sleeve slipped back, revealing bruises shaped unmistakably by hands. Large, violent, deliberate. Elias inhaled sharply. She yanked the sleeve down, shame overtaking her face like a shutter slamming shut. Hazel didn't notice. But Elias did. And anger, hot and quiet, pooled beneath his ribs. He sat beside her, not touching, just near enough for his warmth to reach her. "No one here will hurt you," he whispered. "Not while you're under my roof." Something in her broke, softly, like the first crack in river ice, yet instead of words, she offered him one fragile nod. Outside, a sudden thud shook the porch. Hazel jumped. Elias rose slowly, feeling the air shift around him. The woman's eyes widened in terror. Someone was at the door. The knock thudded again, sharper this time, rattling the frost along the window panes. Elias stepped toward the door with the quiet, controlled breath of a man who had survived too many winters and too many disappointments to start wearing fear on his face now. Behind him, the woman pulled Hazel closer, her fingers tightening around the child's small shoulders as though expecting the world to break through the door and reclaim her. Elias opened it slowly. Relief slipped through him. Not a gang, not trouble from the trail. Only Nadine Crowell stood on the porch, bundled in her thick wool coat, snow in her hair like scattered pearls. She held a basket in one arm. "Figured you could use extra food today," she said, brisk as ever, though her eyes flicked past Elias into the cabin with curiosity she didn't bother hiding. "And maybe a pair of hands if things are complicated." Elias stepped aside. Nadine entered, her gaze softening instantly when it landed on the woman huddled by the hearth. The woman shrank a little, unused to such attention, but Nadine kept her distance, as if careful not to spook a skittish animal. "Lord above," she murmured. "She's hardly older than a girl." Hazel tugged the woman's sleeve protectively, chin raised with tiny defiance. "She's our friend," Hazel declared, with the wholehearted certainty only a child can wield. The woman's eyes glistened at that word, friend, as if it were something she thought she'd forfeited long ago. Nadine crouched nearby, offering the gentlest smile. "You warm enough, sweetheart?" The woman blinked, then nodded faintly. Nadine, sensitive to silence, didn't press her for more. Elias unpacked the basket, cornbread, dried apples, smoked venison, while Nadine quietly pulled him aside. "I saw Sheriff Briggs saddling his horse," she whispered. "He's coming today. I don't know what he intends, but you should prepare." Elias's jaw hardened. "I won't let him frighten her." "I believe you," Nadine said, placing a steady hand on his arm. "But truth isn't always what they're after, Elias. Sometimes folks just want a story to blame someone for." He knew that well enough. When Nadine left, the cabin fell into a tender rhythm. Snow continued its patient descent outside, but indoors life warmed. The fire crackled, Hazel giggled while braiding the woman's hair, and the smell of cornbread pulled from the skillet filled the air. The woman still hadn't spoken again, but her silence no longer felt as hollow. She moved gently, softly, with small gestures that revealed pieces of the person she might have been before fear carved her thin. Elias noticed everything. The way she smoothed Hazel's curls with instinctive tenderness. The careful stitching she added to the frayed hem of her dress. The startled, grateful glance she gave him each time he set something near her. Food, blankets, even just a mug of warm water. It was as though she didn't understand kindness offered without demand. At one point, while Hazel napped on the rug, the woman rose unsteadily and began sweeping the floor with slow, deliberate strokes. Elias approached her gently, palms open. "You don't need to earn your place here," he said, voice soft. "You're a guest, not a burden." Her hand tightened on the broom. Shame rippled through her posture, the kind of shame worn into the bones. Elias stepped closer, just enough that she could feel his presence, not enough to overwhelm. "You're safe," he repeated, each word slow as a heartbeat. Her breathing hitched, and when she looked up at him, something fragile in her gaze seemed to thaw. Not trust yet, but perhaps the beginning of it. Later, as daylight dimmed, Elias carved wood by the window, whittling horses like he used to for Hazel when she was smaller. The woman watched from the hearth, curiosity flickering across her face. When he glanced up, she flushed and looked away, fingers twisting the edge of her shawl. A small, sweet thing stirred in the air, a quiet blooming. Elias set the carving down and crossed to her. Without speaking, he offered the wooden horse. She hesitated, then reached out with trembling fingers. Her touch was reverent, as if she'd never held something made solely for her before. That moment, simple, wordless, felt like a shift in the cabin's very air. But peace has a way of shattering just when a soul dares to believe in it. Hoofbeats thundered across the snow outside, sudden and heavy. Hazel jolted awake. The woman froze, the wooden horse slipping from her hands and clattering against the floor. Fear washed over her in a visible wave, draining the color from her face. Elias rose sharply. He recognized that sound, more than one rider. Fast. Purposeful. He grabbed his coat and moved to the window. 3 men on horseback were approaching, dark shapes against the blinding snow. They weren't wearing sheriff badges. They weren't townsfolk. They rode with the assured predatory posture of men who believed the world owed them obedience. The woman stumbled back until she struck the wall, her fingers clawing at the shawl like it might shield her. Elias turned toward her, understanding dawning like a painful truth. "These the ones?" he asked quietly. Her eyes brimmed with terror. She didn't nod, but she didn't have to. Hazel clung to Elias's leg. He lifted her gently and set her behind the table. Then he knelt before the woman. She trembled violently, memories clearly roaring through her like wildfire. Elias's voice came low, steady, the anchor she needed. "Listen to me. They won't touch you, not while you're here." A tear slipped down her cheek, trailing over the bruise near her jaw. She tried to speak again, throat trembling with effort, but only a choked whisper escaped. "Please." He didn't need the rest to understand. Outside, the men dismounted. Snow crunched beneath their boots as they fanned out, circling the house like wolves scenting prey. Elias reached for the rifle hanging above the mantel just as the first fist slammed against the door, hard enough to rattle the walls. Then a voice, rough and snarling, cut through the winter air. "We know she's in there, Hart. Hand her over." The woman collapsed to her knees, hands pressed to her mouth to keep from sobbing. And Elias, standing between her and the door, felt something fierce awaken inside him, something that had been buried with his grief but now rose like fire meeting oxygen. The door shook again beneath another blow, dust drifting from the rafters as if the cabin itself exhaled in dread. Elias steadied his grip on the rifle, pulse steady, breath low. Behind him, the woman knelt trembling, Hazel pressed tightly against her side. The men outside muttered to each other, boots scraping the snow in restless circles. 3 shadows moved past the frosted window, blotting out the faint Christmas light. Elias stepped forward, voice calm but edged like a blade pulled slow from its sheath. "My daughter's inside," he called. "You want to speak, you do it without threats." The response was a harsh laugh. "We don't give a damn about your little girl, Hart. The woman belongs to us. Hand her over, and maybe we leave this place standing." Belongs. The word struck like a slap. Elias turned, meeting the woman's wide, terrified eyes. She shook her head violently, fingers digging into the shawl as though holding on to the last shred of hope she dared believe in. Every bruise on her skin seemed to speak at once. "Please, not them." He lowered his voice so only she could hear. "I need to know their claim. What did they do to you?" The woman swallowed, throat trembling. She lifted one trembling hand and traced 3 lines across her wrist, scars. Old ones. Then she pointed to the door with a shudder, her meaning clear. The scars came from them. They didn't own her. They hurt her. They hunted her. Rage swelled inside Elias, slow and molten. His late wife had carried that same hunted look in her final days, fearing the illness would take her from their child. He couldn't save her then. But he could save this woman now. Outside, one of the men slammed the butt of his gun against the door. "Open up, Hart, before we open it for you." Elias lifted the rifle, sighting the doorframe. "Hazel," he said without turning, "take her to the bedroom. Stay low." Hazel obeyed instantly, tugging the woman with her. The woman resisted only for a breath, as though refusing to leave him alone, but a gentle push from Elias sent her stumbling toward safety. She lingered at the edge of the hallway, watching him with a look that burned straight into him, a silent plea, a fragile trust. The next knock wasn't a knock at all. It was a violent crash. Elias fired a warning shot into the ceiling. Dust rained down. The men outside fell silent for a heartbeat. Then came the voice he'd been half expecting, half dreading. "Elias Hart," Sheriff Briggs called from beyond the snow, "you best stand aside. These men claim she escaped lawful custody. They've got papers." Elias's stomach dropped. He hadn't heard Briggs approach. The storm had swallowed the sound of hooves. The sheriff's presence twisted everything. Briggs loved authority more than fairness. If he believed the men's claim, the woman would be taken. Returned. Hurt again. Elias opened the door just enough to look out. The sheriff sat atop his horse, coat pulled tight, rifle strapped to his saddle. The 3 men stood beside him, eyes cold, smug with the sheriff's arrival. "Papers?" Elias asked, heat in his voice. "Show them." One man smirked and produced a folded sheet. Briggs lifted it with gloved hands, reading quickly. "Says here she's indentured for theft. Says she ran off before her contract ended. The woman's stifled cry echoed behind Elias. He felt the sound crack through him like a breaking branch. Something about the paper didn't sit right. No seal, no signature he recognized, just words scribbled in hurried ink. "That's a lie," Elias said. "She hasn't stolen a thing." Briggs shrugged. "Law's the law. Contract's a contract. And kindness is kindness," Elias snapped. "You gonna ignore that?" Briggs's jaw ticked. "Move aside." But Elias didn't. He stepped fully between the sheriff and the doorway, blocking their view inside. Snow whipped around him, clinging to his hair, his coat, as though the storm itself lent him weight. One of the men spat into the snow. "Enough talk. She's ours." He reached for his gun. Elias acted before thought. He raised the rifle, barrel aimed straight at the man's chest. "You try stepping onto my land again," he warned, voice steady, "and you'll meet the same cold fate you intended for her." The sheriff cursed. "Elias, don't make this worse." "You show me a real contract," Elias shot back, signed by a judge, stamped by the county. Not something scribbled by the same men who bruised her to begin with. That gave Briggs pause. Doubt flickered in his eyes. Thin, but present. Elias pressed. "You've seen men like them before. Tell me you ain't smelled the rot on their story." Briggs exhaled slowly, troubled. The men shifted uneasily. Seeing the hesitation, one of the men lunged forward, hand closing around Elias's coat. In an instant, the woman appeared behind Elias in the doorway, grabbing the man's wrist with desperate strength. Her voice, raw and broken, tore from her throat, "No!" The single word hung in the air like a bell struck in a cathedral. The men froze. Elias turned to her, the first sound she had spoken since arriving. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes burned with something fierce, pleading for her life, begging for someone to believe her. And the sheriff, witnessing the eruption of terror from a woman who hadn't spoken a full sentence in days, seemed shaken. Briggs finally lowered his rifle. "We ride back to town," he ordered the men. "We'll sort this out proper. Bring real papers if you have them." The men protested, but Briggs silenced them with a glare. They mounted their horses, pulling away through the storm, their silhouettes swallowed piece by the drifting white. The sheriff lingered a moment, staring at Elias. "You're playing with fire," he said softly. "Be sure she's worth the burn." Elias didn't answer. He shut the door, bolting it tight. The woman collapsed against the wall, sliding to the floor, shaking from relief, or terror, or both. Hazel ran to her, wrapping tiny arms around her waist. Elias knelt before them, breathing hard, heart pounding like an unbroken horse. For the first time, the woman looked at him not with fear, but with something else, something that flickered like the first spark in a long-dead hearth. Gratitude. Hope. A hesitant trust forming a fragile bridge between them. Then, with trembling fingers, she reached into the pocket of her torn dress and pulled out something folded tight, something she had kept hidden all along. A second note. She held it out to Elias, eyes shimmering. "Read," she whispered. And the storm outside seemed to hold its breath. Elias unfolded the second note with careful fingers, the paper soft and worn as though carried close to a heart for far too long. The woman watched him with trembling breath. Hazel nestled beside her, one small hand resting protectively on her knee. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting shadows that danced along the walls like ghosts waiting to hear the truth revealed. The ink was faint but readable. "If you find her, treat her gently. She has never known gentle before." No signature. No name. Only that final line, written with a shaking hand, a plea from someone who had loved her enough to let her go. When Elias lifted his gaze, the woman's eyes overflowed. She pressed her palm to her chest, as though the note contained the last pulse of someone she'd lost. With agonizing effort, she whispered, "She saved me, but couldn't come." Her voice cracked on the last word, and Elias understood, the writer of the note was gone. Dead or taken. And this woman had run alone, carrying the final fragment of mercy offered to her. Elias knelt before her. "You're not alone anymore." The words came naturally, gently, like water finding the riverbed it belonged to. But the moment shattered when another sound rose through the storm, a distant, furious yell. Then another. Elias's body tightened. Through the window he saw torchlight weaving erratically in the snow. The three men had returned, without the sheriff, without hesitation, without fear of consequence. They had come to claim her by force. The woman gasped and grabbed Elias's sleeve. Her entire body shook. Hazel whimpered and clung to her. Elias rose swiftly, loading the rifle with practiced hands, his heart hammering with a familiar, unshakable instinct to protect. Outside, boots pounded against frozen earth. Harsh voices cut through the night. "She's ours, Hart. You can't hide her. Open the door or we burn it down." A torch slammed against the porch rail, sparks flying. The woman covered her ears, teeth chattering in raw panic. Elias moved toward her, cupping her face with both hands, forcing her eyes to meet his. "Listen to me. I won't let them take you. Not today. Not ever." Her tears fell freely, but she nodded, clutching Hazel close. Another crash shook the door. Elias positioned himself between the women and the danger, rifle ready, breath controlled. But flames were already licking the edge of the porch. Smoke drifted through the cracks. If they burned the house, there would be nowhere left to run. "Stay behind me," he murmured, then stepped forward. Before he reached the door, a thunderous gunshot cracked through the storm. Then another. The shouting outside turned to chaos. Elias paused, listening. A horse neighed violently. One man screamed. The torch dropped, sizzling in the snow. Then came a fourth voice, loud, commanding, unmistakable. "Drop your weapons. Sheriff Briggs." Elias opened the door cautiously. The cold wind slapped him, filling his lungs with bitter frost. Briggs stood in the snowfall, rifle aimed steady, his coat flapping like a dark banner. One man lay wounded near the porch, clutching his leg. The other two hovered wildly between fighting and fleeing. Briggs fired a warning shot into the air. "I warned you boys," he growled. "If you can't prove your claim, you can't take her." The men cursed, desperate. She belongs to no one." Briggs snapped. Elias felt something loosen in his chest. Surprise, gratitude, the rare sensation of justice aligning with mercy. The men mounted their horses, dragging the wounded one between them. "This ain't over," one spat before they vanished into the swirling snow. But for tonight, they were gone. Briggs turned toward Elias, lowering his gun. Snow dusted his hat, his mustache, softening the man who so often hardened himself against everything. "You were right," he said bruisingly. "Papers fake. Learned the truth on my ride home." He hesitated, then added quietly, "I ain't arresting her. She's under your roof now. Your problem, your fight. And I reckon you're the only man around with a spine steady enough to give her a chance." Elias nodded, a silent thank you passing between them. Briggs tipped his hat and rode back into the storm, leaving only hoofprints and the breath of a second chance in his wake. Inside, the woman rose unsteadily as Elias re-entered. She reached for him, not out of fear, but out of something deeper, more fragile. Her hand brushed his coat, then slid to his chest, resting above his heartbeat. A silent question, a trembling hope. Elias covered her hand with his own. "They won't touch you again," he murmured. She shook her head and whispered, Why help me?" Elias inhaled slowly. "Because someone should have helped you long before now. Because kindness shouldn't be the rarest thing a person finds. Because Hazel already loves you. And because—" he paused, feeling the truth rise warm and steady. "Because I don't want to imagine this home without you in it." Her breath hitched. She looked at Hazel, safe, smiling shyly, then back at Elias, tears tracing down her cheeks like the softest surrender. Outside, the storm began to ease, flakes drifting gently rather than whipping with fury. Dawn hinted faintly along the horizon, washing the world in pale silver. The woman stepped closer, lifting her fragile, shaking voice. "If I stay, Will you teach me how to live without fear? Elias brushed a thumb against her cheek, tracing the place where bruises were already fading. I'll teach you everything I know, he said, and learn the rest with you. Hazel tugged the woman's hand. Stay with us forever, she whispered, in that simple way only a child could phrase a vow. The woman knelt, pulling Hazel into her arms. When she rose, she turned toward Elias, resolve blooming behind her eyes. Not the trembling fear of a hunted soul, but the dawning courage of someone choosing a new life. She placed the final note, the first note, into his hand again. Please love her. She lifted her chin, voice steady for the first time. Will you? And the last of the storm's darkness lifted, making space for the answer waiting in Elias' heart's quiet, beating heart.